Welcome to JGTCR, I'm Cope, and today we are tuning the Corvette ZR1 C6. Let's get into it. In factory trim, this C6 feels much heavier than it appears to be. It is not a fan of anything except the accelerator. This Corvette has a super long gear shift time. There is a distinct pakata sound that must play through in its entirety before the next gear is selected and power is delivered. This is something that must be taken into consideration when driving, as it interrupts power delivery significantly and can cause oversteer and understeer issues. The handling does not like high RPM, and it will cause it to understeer into oblivion. However, the engine thrives on higher RPM, so it can be a difficult balance to strike between the two. We can opt to stay at lower RPM as it is more stable, however, it is also much slower. The power is good, but it does feel somewhat lazy. Not that it is, it just feels that way due to how long it takes to get through the rev range. Power delivery is fine for the most part, but the gear shifts cause issues with its button switch instant power once the gear engages. The brakes are average at best and considerably lazy when slowing us down, so make sure to brake early and hang on to that pedal a touch longer than seems necessary. Let's collect our time. "7 minutes 14.8 seconds. On to the race tune. The C6 without tuning was an absolute nightmare. It was too low and suffered from over and understeer issues. Unfortunately, we did not realize the extent of the clearance issues up front until very late in our 30-minute tune time limit. So our final tune is not as fleshed out as usual. However, it still performs well and is stable. It just means it will be high on the retune list after we finish tuning all cars on GT7. Let's see how it performs on the Nürburgring. This C6 has improved for the better in so many ways. Every facet of this vehicle has been refined after modification and tuning. The handling is sharp and responsive at all times. Even when we make mistakes, the car remains true despite our shortcomings. There is a lot of power at our disposal, and the C6 makes the best of it, making sure it is used effectively. The power delivery is excellent considering the amount of HP we carry. It can be aggressive if we are heavy-handed, but it stays in line with our requests for the most part if we handle it with the appropriate respect. The brakes are awesome. They remain stable and solid even in the worst conditions. Let's collect our time. 6 minutes 5.9 seconds. And now the drift tune. A fairly standard drift tune for the C6. The body height adjustment is lower at the rear than the front. The rear suspension is also softer than the front. The differential is completely locked, and of course we have some ballast of 80 kilos at a ballast positioning of 40 over the rear wheels. Let's drift Suzuka. The C6 is a very stable and predictable drift car in most scenarios. It does suffer from understeer if we choose to be aggressive with our drift style, but if we are chilled and laid back, it moves extremely well. The handling is superb, and this Corvette responds well to inputs as long as we are reasonable with our throttle application. If we choose to be too aggressive on the gas pedal, it will go through bouts of understeer. Aside from that, the steering is very stable, albeit a touch on the lazy side. Power is available in spades, but it is smooth right the way through the rev range. There are no nasty spikes to deal with whatsoever. Power delivery is extremely respectable, not overly aggressive but firm and attentive. The wheel speed while drifting can get away from us very easily if we are not careful. We should use caution when flat footing on corner exits. The C6 is a great drift car and is highly recommended. Time for an engine swap. With the engine swap in place, some of our known issues become more enhanced. After our Pakata gear change, power comes in hyper aggressive and kicks the tail hard, so drivers beware. The understeer we experienced in factory trim has been leveled up with the extra weight up front. Those extra kilos also impact our weight shift as we turn into corners and when we change directions with steering inputs. The handling works well enough if we are very cautious with our driving. We must be patient, gentle, and all will be well. If we choose to be too heavy-handed with our steering inputs, we can easily destabilize the car, causing both oversteer and understeer issues. The power we have available to us is excessive, and clearly it's going to be aggressive with this engine swap in place. Once we reach 4000 RPM, the wheel spin comes on like a light switch in any gear, and the tail end will snap out with a vengeance if we use even more than a hair on turning inputs. The higher gears are less violent, but still they are violent nonetheless. The brakes do slow us down eventually, but it takes a very long time to reach a reasonable pace. So brake extremely early and make a wish upon a star to slow down in time before we need to turn in. Let's collect our time. (7 minutes, 11.2 seconds). And now, the race tune. We learned our lesson from tuning the factory-engined model and raised the front to a reasonable level straight away. But with all the extra power from the engine swap, our focus was maintaining traction at the rear end. This is reflected in a much softer rear suspension and also additional ballast of 110 kilos at a ballast positioning of 45 over the rear wheels. Let's see how it performs on the Nürburgring. The C6 with the engine swap and no tune is a bit of a nightmare, but if we get a decent tune dialed in, it can be a bit of a rocket. We have had to make some sacrifices for control, which seem counterintuitive, but it all works. The extra weight at the rear helps us put the power down to the ground. However, it also causes understeer when the rear hooks properly. If we manage the throttle vigilantly, time falls away each lap. The handling is good when it's not under load from the throttle. The vehicle moves well on circuit. It is crisp and agile, especially considering the weight up front and the counterweight to balance it out. There is a metric crap ton of power available to us, and managing that power is our sole objective when driving. That means there is no sleeping behind the wheel when we're piloting this one. The power delivery can be very smooth if we modulate the throttle appropriately. The key is to only use around 85 to 90% throttle in most situations, namely in any gear below 5th. The hyper-aggressiveness of power delivery mostly exists in that last 10 to 15% of throttle input. Going full throttle should be reserved for straight sections of road or long high-speed sweeping turns at best. When the tail kicks out, it can be super violent, so when traction is lost, we must regain control as quickly as possible, especially when turning to any degree. The brakes do a stellar job considering what they are up against. Braking is solid and stable, however, it does take a long time to slow down, so plan ahead if we don't want to run off the edge of the circuit. An additional consideration is that the C6 does not like to brake and turn, so all of our braking must be done in a straight line. Let's collect our time. 6 minutes 2.1 seconds. On to the drift tune. The tail end on the C6 with the engine conversion like to step out very aggressively. As such, we use ballast of 200 kilos at a ballast positioning of 50 to tame it. The rest of our settings are fairly par for the course when it comes to drift tunes. Let's go drifting. The C6 with the engine swap is the epitome of lazy drift. It provides a slow swaying drift that is most at home in the lower RPM range. Somewhere between the 3 to 5,000 RPM is where this vehicle thrives. The handling is impressive considering how far out the balance has been thrown. The steering can seem somewhat lazy, but it does extremely well in this application. The power underfoot is astronomical thanks to the engine swap, and it's very much a brute force setup. Power delivery is extremely erratic in the higher RPM. It can be drifted there, but it is difficult. Wheel speed is a major factor, so it is best to stay around 4,000 RPM, as in this area it is surprisingly well behaved and easy to control. The ZR1 C6 with the engine swap is a great drift car, especially if we like that lazy drift. And that's all we have for you today, so until next time, keep racing!